Ladies and gentlemen, the sole genius behind the Ares system, my son Brent. The applause was deafening, and I stood frozen as my father Edward placed the microphone into my brother's hands, a gambling addict who couldn't write a single line of code. Edward leaned toward me, his smile perfectly intact, and delivered the sentence that erased 10 years of my life. "Don't make a scene, Mia," he whispered, his voice cold and precise. "You're just the mechanic. Mechanics don't get equity. Smile, or you won't even get a severance package." I didn't scream or cry. I reached into my pocket, took out my security badge, and set it gently on the mahogany table, where it made a soft click no one heard beneath the cheering. Then I turned around and walked out, past the investors, past the champagne, past the $1.2 billion worth of technology that, unknown to all of them, was about to become very expensive paperweights. Before I tell you what happens when a mechanic stops fixing the engine, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and has anyone ever taken credit for your life's work? I sat in my 10-year-old sedan with the engine off, listening to the muted bass of celebration music vibrating through the concrete of the garage. My name is Mia. I'm 32 years old, and for the last decade I have been a ghost. Inside that building, they were toasting the future of Ares MedTech, celebrating Class 3 robotic prosthetics capable of letting a paralyzed man run a marathon, yet none of them knew how those machines truly worked. They didn't know that every line of code, every safety protocol, every FDA compliance log carried my digital fingerprint. My brother Brent, the so-called architect, couldn't even spell compliance. He was a gambling addict who treated company accounts like a personal casino, and I spent my 20s cleaning up his disasters, working 18-hour days fixing his errors, covering his tracks, making sure our technology never killed anyone by mistake. I signed every safety log because Brent didn't have the license. I was the net that caught him every single time he fell. You might wonder why I stayed, why I let them use me for 10 years, a question I asked myself on lonely drives home while they vacationed on money I earned. The truth is complicated. Psychologists call it normalized cruelty. My father didn't break me overnight. He dismantled me slowly, methodically, starting in childhood. He taught me love was conditional, that my worth wasn't inherent but functional, that I mattered only when I was useful. When I was 12, I won the state science fair and ran home clutching the blue ribbon, bursting with pride. Edward didn't even glance at it. He pointed at Brent, crying over a broken toy car, and said, "Fix it, Mia. Your brother is the statue. You are the pedestal. Without you he falls, so don't you dare move." That lesson stuck. I wasn't the art, I was the support. I wasn't the star, I was the gravity holding their world together. They trained me to be invisible, to believe being a good daughter meant burning myself alive to keep them warm. They assumed that training would last forever, that I would quietly fade the way pedestals do while statues collect the praise. They forgot one thing. Remove the pedestal and the statue doesn't just look smaller, it crashes and shatters. I looked down at my hands, the hands that wrote the code, secured the safety of thousands of patients, and held the only key to the kingdom. My phone buzzed against my thigh, lighting up with the notification I'd received every day for 3,600 days. It was time. 5 p.m., the automated prompt from the Ares central server. I lifted the phone and saw the familiar white box. Biometric handshake required, Level 5 administrator, authorized daily operations. For 10 years I had pressed the green accept button without thought, on Christmas mornings, at weddings, during dates, with the flu, even while burying my grandmother. That button was the leash keeping the billion-dollar dog obedient. Edward thought taking my plastic badge stripped me of power, that firing me erased me, forgetting he hadn't built a company but a kingdom of Class 3 medical devices requiring a licensed monarch to function, and he had just exiled the Queen. I propped my tablet on the steering wheel and watched the live stream as Edward laughed and clinked glasses with investors. Behind him, the Ares Mark IV prototype arm played a delicate piano sonata, titanium fingers moving with fluid grace, a masterpiece of engineering. My masterpiece. Zero equity, I whispered, staring at my phone. The green button meant safety, peace, swallowing the insult and hoping for crumbs of gratitude later. The red button meant war. I didn't hesitate or tremble. I pressed decline. Authorization denied flashed across my screen, followed by initiating emergency protocol. On the live stream, the piano stopped mid-note as the Ares arm froze, fingers locked in a rigid protective position. The sudden silence was louder than the applause had been. Edward frowned, tapped his glass, waved at the prototype, expecting motion sensors to respond. Nothing happened. Then the sound began, a low rhythmic alarm blaring from the console, the FDA-mandated warning for an unsupervised device. Beep, beep, beep. The investors slowly lowered their drinks. They exchanged confused looks as Brent rushed to the console, his face drained of color. I watched him hammer at the screen, trying to force his way past the lock, like a child attempting to launch a spaceship by slamming the dashboard. Behind them, the Ares logo vanished, replaced by a massive red banner scrolling across the presentation screen. Sharp, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. System locked down. Unauthorized operation. Licensed supervisor missing. All units disabled. Edward's smile collapsed instantly. He spun around, eyes sweeping the room, scanning faces, searching for the one person he had just discarded like garbage. I took a slow sip from the lukewarm water bottle resting in my cup holder. The show was only beginning. The silence inside my car shattered as my phone rang, blasting the ringtone I had assigned to my father, a harsh, repetitive siren. Edward's name flashed across the dashboard like a warning. I answered without greeting him. I didn't need to turn anything back on. His voice exploded through the speakers, so loud it distorted, chaos roaring behind him. Investors shouting, chairs scraping, the relentless FDA alarm pulsing in the background. Turn it back on right now, Mia. I know you did this. I know you rigged it. I leaned back in my seat, eyes on the live stream playing on my tablet, where Brent was sweating through his tailored suit, pounding uselessly on a console that was completely dead. I didn't rig anything, Edward, I said calmly, almost bored. I told you I'm just the mechanic, and since I don't work there anymore, I can't authorize safety protocols. Don't give me that technical nonsense, he screamed. You sabotaged the fleet. You planted a virus. I'll sue you for everything you own. I'll bury you so deep you'll never work in this industry again. It's not a virus. I corrected. It's a feature, specifically the 24-hour supervisor mandate for Class 3 medical devices. Without a licensed administrator to biometrically sign the logs, the system defaults to safe mode to prevent patient injury. It's not sabotage, Dad. It's the law. I don't care about the law, he roared. I have investors here. I have $1 billion deal on the table. Fix it. There was a scuffle, and then my mother's voice replaced his, trembling and shrill, using that breathless sob she always deployed when she wanted control. Mia, please, Cynthia pleaded. How could you do this? How could you be so cruel to your brother? This was his big night. He needs this win. Why are you trying to destroy this family? I closed my eyes briefly as the familiar shift took place. When threats failed, guilt followed. They didn't care that Edward had erased me minutes earlier. They only cared that I was ruining the celebration. I didn't destroy this family, Mom, I said quietly. You did when you sat there and watched Dad hand my life's work to a gambling addict. You chose your side. We gave you a job, she snapped, the mask slipping. We fed you. We let you play scientist in that lab, and this is how you repay us, by humiliating us? Give me the phone. Edward yanked it back, his breathing ragged. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. I want the override code now. Give me the password and maybe I won't call the police. I looked at my hand again, the thumb that had pressed decline. There is no password, Edward, I said. It's biometric. It scans the unique vascular pattern of a licensed engineer's thumbprint. Mine. Then get back here and unlock it, he demanded. I can't do that, I replied. Why the hell not? Because you fired me, I said, and as you so clearly explained, mechanics don't get equity. So unless you're prepared to sign over 50% of the company in the next 5 minutes, my thumb stays with me. You can't do this, he stammered as reality finally caught up to him. You can't walk away holding the keys to $1 billion company. I already did, I said. Good luck with the investors, Dad. I hear they hate surprises. I ended the call. The siren cut off. On the tablet, I watched the lead investor rise, button his jacket, and walk out as Edward chased him, clutching his arm, desperate and small. I shifted the car into gear. I wasn't going home. I was going back, not to fix it, but to finish it. I walked into the Ares MedTech lobby, where the security guard, old Mr. Henderson, couldn't meet my eyes and waved me through the turnstile with a trembling hand. I took the elevator to the penthouse floor, expecting lawyers, settlements. A paper slid across the table with too many zeros attached. I was wrong. I forgot that when a narcissist is cornered, they don't negotiate, they destroy. The boardroom doors stood open, the air inside thick and suffocating. The investors remained seated in tense silence. Brent leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone, bored. Edward stood at the head of the table, no longer sweating, no longer shouting, calmly adjusting his cufflinks. Too calm. I'm here, I said, stepping forward. Let's talk about the equity you denied me. Edward looked up, his face folding into a performance of such deep sorrow that for a heartbeat I almost believed it. I'm sorry, Mia, he said softly. I didn't want it to end this way. End how? I asked. He gestured toward the side door. It burst open as 4 men in windbreakers stormed in, moving with sharp, practiced precision that had nothing to do with corporate law. Bold yellow letters on their backs said FBI. My blood turned to ice. Mia Vance, the lead agent, barked, crossing the room in 3 strides. Hands where I can see them. What is this? I said, backing away. I didn't do anything. We have a sworn affidavit from the CEO of Ares MedTech alleging corporate espionage, wire fraud, and the deployment of malicious ransomware, the agent said as he seized my wrist and spun me around. I looked straight at Edward while he shook his head slowly, performing the role of the heartbroken father with award-winning precision. He raised a thick manila folder in trembling hands. She rigged the system, Edward told the agents, his voice cracking with fake grief. We have the logs. She planted a virus to hold the company hostage. She demanded 50% of the shares to unlock it. It's extortion. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around my wrists, the click echoing through the dead-silent room. I stood there restrained while the people I had carried for 10 years watched without blinking. The lead investor stared at me with open disgust. In their eyes, I wasn't the architect anymore. I was just a bitter, unstable former employee trying to burn the place down. I didn't plant a virus, I said, my voice trembling despite everything. It's a safety protocol. Check the code. Save it for the judge, the agent said as he tightened the cuffs. Brent pushed himself off the wall and sauntered over, smiling. He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. I told you, sis, he whispered. Dad's always one step ahead. You really thought you could steal my company? Enjoy prison. My mother, Cynthia, sat in the corner. She wasn't crying anymore. She stared at the floor, refusing to look at the monster they had helped create. Edward, I said, locking eyes with my father. You know this is a lie. You know I didn't rig anything. We tried to help you, Mia, Edward said loudly, performing for the agents. We gave you a job. We gave you purpose, and you betrayed us. The agent shoved me forward. Let's go. As they dragged me toward the exit, my thoughts raced. This had been planned. They knew they couldn't defeat me technically, so they chose to bury me legally. They framed me, twisted my own safety systems into weapons. I glanced at the prototypes, still frozen, still flashing red. Edward thought arresting me solved everything, thought a jail cell would force me to surrender the keys. He didn't realize that by putting handcuffs on me, he hadn't just framed me. He had stepped straight into a federal trap he didn't even see. The agent began reading my rights, but my eyes stayed on the flashing message behind Edward. System lockdown. FD Protocol 21 CFR Part 11. Edward was glowing with victory, convinced he had won. He had taken my work, erased my name, and now planned to erase my freedom. But he forgot about the lead investor. "Wait," the investor said, pointing at the screen. "That error code isn't ransomware. That's federal compliance." I told the agent to pull 21 CFR Part 11. When they checked, the truth unraveled quickly. Removing me, the only licensed regulatory supervisor, had legally shut the facility down and exposed the company for operating in violation of federal law. A felony. I told them to review the logs. They weren't hacks. They were my safety audits, and buried beneath them was the real crime. Brent overriding safety limits and falsifying data to inflate the stock price. That was the real reason they fired me. The investor saw the evidence and exploded. $1 billion deal had been built on fraud. Minutes later, the cuffs were removed from my wrists and snapped onto Edward's and Brent's instead. 3 months later, Ares MedTech no longer existed, seized, liquidated, and bankrupt. Brent took a plea deal and went to prison. My mother fled and begged me for money. I ignored her. I returned only once, to purchase equipment for my new firm. Edward was there, out on bail, screaming at movers as his office was dismantled. And that's when it finally became clear. His power had never been real. It was just money stacked high. Without it, he was nothing. He tried to command me one last time. I walked away. Outside, sunlight hit my face as I unlocked the servers for my new company. My name, my license, my future. Sometimes the only way forward is to let the wrong system collapse and build your own. A felony. I told them to review the logs. They weren't hacks. They were my safety audits, and buried beneath them was the real crime. Brent overriding safety limits and falsifying data to inflate the stock price. That was the real reason they fired me. The investor saw the evidence and exploded. $1 billion deal had been built on fraud. Minutes later, the cuffs were removed from my wrists and snapped onto Edward's and Brent's instead. 3 months later, Ares MedTech no longer existed, seized, liquidated, and bankrupt. Brent took a plea deal and went to prison. My mother fled and begged me for money. I ignored her. I returned only once, to purchase equipment for my new firm. Edward was there, out on bail, screaming at movers as his office was dismantled. And that's when it finally became clear. His power had never been real. It was just money stacked high. Without it, he was nothing. He tried to command me one last time. I walked away. Outside, sunlight hit my face as I unlocked the servers for my new company. My name, my license, my future. Sometimes the only way forward is to let the wrong system collapse and build your own. A felony. I told them to review the logs. They weren't hacks. They were my safety audits, and buried beneath them was the real crime. Brent overriding safety limits and falsifying data to inflate the stock price. That was the real reason they fired me. The investor saw the evidence and exploded. $1 billion deal had been built on fraud. Minutes later, the cuffs were removed from my wrists and snapped onto Edward's and Brent's instead. 3 months later, Ares MedTech no longer existed, seized, liquidated, and bankrupt. Brent took a plea deal and went to prison. My mother fled and begged me for money. I ignored her. I returned only once, to purchase equipment for my new firm. Edward was there, out on bail, screaming at movers as his office was dismantled. And that's when it finally became clear. His power had never been real. It was just money stacked high. Without it, he was nothing. He tried to command me one last time. I walked away. Outside, sunlight hit my face as I unlocked the servers for my new company. My name, my license, my future. Sometimes the only way forward is to let the wrong system collapse and build your own. A felony. I told them to review the logs. They weren't hacks. They were my safety audits, and buried beneath them was the real crime. Brent overriding safety limits and falsifying data to inflate the stock price. That was the real reason they fired me. The investor saw the evidence and exploded. $1 billion deal had been built on fraud. Minutes later, the cuffs were removed from my wrists and snapped onto Edward's and Brent's instead. 3 months later, Ares MedTech no longer existed, seized, liquidated, and bankrupt. Brent took a plea deal and went to prison. My mother fled and begged me for money. I ignored her. I returned only once, to purchase equipment for my new firm. Edward was there, out on bail, screaming at movers as his office was dismantled. And that's when it finally became clear. His power had never been real. It was just money stacked high. Without it, he was nothing. He tried to command me one last time. I walked away. Outside, sunlight hit my face as I unlocked the servers for my new company. My name, my license, my future. Sometimes the only way forward is to let the wrong system collapse and build your own.